I moved as fast as my body would allow me to. The agonizing pain pulsating through my joints and my muscles fired on all cylinders. As I got closer to the gate, I felt my body grow stiff again. I stopped just a few feet away from the threshold of the forest. I looked back, and standing just 10 feet behind me in the center of the trail was the man in the black cassock. I was not sleeping this time. This time I knew for sure. His hood was pulled back, his brow was furrowed, and his lips were pursed. He was smiling, so genuinely sweet, with just the right touch of shyness, just like how Brian used to. On this face, it was a sign of bliss. My throat got dry, and my chest felt light. I turned my back on the man in the cassock as my eyes welled with tears. I tried sniffing discreetly when I realized that a great passage of my life had come and gone. I did not cry then, but I would cry now. "I loved you, Brian," I said aloud. Then I began walking towards the road. I walked until the man in the cassock was recaptured by the darkness of the forest. His voice keeps echoing in my mind over and over. I remember how his face looked really sick, like it had turned a yellowish color. There was blood around the corners of his mouth. The air pacemaker made a sound that I had imagined before. A tube stuck out from the corner of his mouth, and he had clear tubes in his arms. The nurses, wearing teal and blue clothes, came in and out quietly. The chest of the person went up and down in a strange way, like a conveyor belt that might stop at any moment. My dad used to say he looked like someone from the Holocaust, but it didn't look like my brother at all. It was really hard for me to see him like this. What I saw was something no one should have to see. The hospital people told us he wouldn't leave his bed alive. My mom sat down and started crying. While we were there with him, we couldn't stand to see him suffer anymore. The doctor said, "If we take out the pacemaker and give less medicine, he'll be able to hear you talking. But if we do that, he might die in a few minutes. If that's what you want." We just wanted everything to be over. My dad agreed, giving permission for what was about to happen. When my brother's eyes opened, it made me feel sick. They were as yellow as his skin. There was a fiery look in the blood vessels of his eyes. The struggle, the gasping for air, and the pain on his face made me really angry at everything in life. I even cursed God, blaming him for everything and cursing everyone. "We love you, Brian. We'll always be a family of 5, my dad said. Finally, my brother's face became relaxed, and his body stopped moving. The doctor came in and checked his signs of life. His eyes were a little bit open, and I could still see the yellow color. She looked at my mom with a mean look, and it made my heart feel heavy. "I'm sorry, he's passed," she said. I held onto my mom, bringing her close to my chest like she used to do for me when I was little. We stood there, and she cried in my arms for a long time. Just like that, he was gone. My whole family cried, but I didn't. I don't know why. I should have been crying a lot, but I wasn't. Instead, I knelt beside his bed and held his hand for a little while, just wanting to feel him one last time. His body was still warm, and I could still feel the life that used to be in him. Not the cold, stiff feeling it would have after being preserved with fluid. I leaned in and kissed his forehead, whispering, "I'll always love you. You'll always be my big brother." I can't talk about everywhere, but on Earth, we have a lot of different things. We make chairs, transistors, scissors, teacups, and dams. There are good things in life like clothes that just came out of the dryer, singing in the shower, opening things with perforated seals, peeling a clementine in one peel, perfectly popped popcorn, seeing someone put on jeggings, when the person at Starbucks spells your name right, and even a box of corgi puppies. The world is full of these things, but there are also bad things like house fires, thoughts of hurting yourself, parents getting divorced, sickness like cancer, and some big names like the New York Stock Exchange and Rupert Murdoch. For me, it seemed like the bad things never stopped, but one sad day in October, I saw how much worse things could get. It was the worst day, and death was knocking on my door, asking for me. On October 25th, a bit more than a year after that night in the hospital, I was driving for what felt like a really long time. The place I was going to wasn't like the busy cities with lots of apartments, traffic jams, and noisy dogs. Freetown looked like something from an old painting of a colonial town, and it was in the southeast part of Bristol County. Most houses had vinyl sidings, the roads were new, and families walked together on the sidewalks. I checked my phone's navigation system. I was just a few miles away now. Turn left on Sesame Seed Avenue, then follow for 3/4 of a mile, it said on the radio. As I got closer, I saw fewer people around. People in these parts lived farther apart than in other places around here, and when I neared the woods, it became even more noticeable. I drove up to a 4-way intersection and saw a very old, worn-out wood sign on the side of the road that said Wampanoag Indian Reservation. The paint had worn away from years of rain and other things. Then, I noticed a fallen sign that said Freetown State Forest 1.5 miles. The sign was rusty and covered in moss, but I could still read it. It seemed odd that no one had fixed it. You would think the town would replace it, but they didn't. After a few minutes, I came across a small store called Main Street Market. It looked like something from the old pioneer days. The 20x10 market had chicory sidings and a hitching post out front. The only thing missing was a sign above the entrance that said guns, pistols, ammunition, hardware and tinware, and a note saying guns and pistols repaired. A neon sign advertising Coors Light was fizzing in the window. I thought it would be a good idea to get some snacks and maybe some spare batteries. I pulled into the dirt lot, and my vehicle kicked up clouds of dust. The lot was completely empty, no other vehicles, not even the owners. But the sign clearly said open. When I walked in, I was greeted by a man with a big grin who looked like he had just crawled out of a bottle of gin. His face was old, his hair and skin were as white as almond blossoms. He whistled a strange tune I had never heard before, a bit spooky. He wore a blue smock with his store's logo on it. Another man with similar features was in the corner stocking shelves with cans of pickled okra. The room had a strange smell. It reminded me of moldy Roquefort cheese, weird but not as bad as you might think. Not trying to be mean, I said politely, giving a little smile. The man grinned big at my answer. What can I do for you, buddy? Just looking for a few things, I said. You let me know if you need any help, okay? Yes, sir, I said. But our talk after that wasn't so nice. 15 minutes passed, and I picked up what I needed for my journey. I went back to the counter where the old store clerk was. What's your name, buddy? The man asked. Scott, I said, Scott Connors. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Connors, the man said, talking with a thick accent, like a typical person from eastern New England. He reached his hand over the counter to shake mine, like how most men here do when they meet someone new. I grabbed his hand, which was as worn and rough as his face. His fingernails were yellow, probably from smoking Rothman Royals. I could tell he was a smoker. As soon as I walked up, I could smell the strong scent of nicotine. The man was like a walking ashtray. Name's Richard Wright, but people call me Dick for short, he said. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Wright. Never seen you around these parts before, buddy. And I'm good at remembering faces when I've seen them a time or two. I'm originally from a little town out west called South Hadley, I told him. Never heard of it, he said. Not too many people have, I replied. What brings you all the way out here to the Bridgewater Triangle, he asked. I didn't see any harm in his question, so I told him. Just taking a little trip on my day off. I like to hike, especially this time of year with all the colorful leaves. He looked at me strangely while he packed my things. I thought it'd be nice to go on a little trek through Freetown Forest. The sound of cans falling from a shelf behind me caught my attention. When I looked over my shoulder, I saw the other man picking up the fallen cans. The look on his face was one I won't forget. It was full of frozen horror. I felt confused. When I turned back to Mr. Wright, his face looked a lot like the other man's. At first, I couldn't understand why he looked so terrified. Mr. Wright stared at me from behind the counter, like I had tree branches growing out of my ears. The color on his face was unusually hard to explain. "Now, what business does a young person like yourself have going out into those woods?" he asked me. "I've been searching for something. No treasure or anything like that. Just looking for some closure, that's all." He rubbed the stubby hairs on his chin, trying to find the right way to tell me something important. Being a stranger, there was always some folklore that the old folks in this area liked to share with outsiders, which is what they call people like me. This wasn't my first time being an outsider. Every time my family and I went to Fish Tales in Whatley, we were met with unfriendly faces. People in that region didn't like anyone who wasn't from around there or of German or Polish descent. "Son, I promise you there ain't nothing in those woods worth visiting. It's just a bad place," the old man warned. "What are you getting at, old-timer?" I asked. "There are places in the world where strange things happen a lot, and this be one of them," he replied. "People go missing in those woods all the time and never turn up. It's like they walked off the face of the earth," he shared with me. "How can that be?" I asked him, not quite sure if I believed him. "I can't say if it's the land or something mysterious causing these things, but they just keep happening." "Well, old-timer, you got my attention. So why don't you tell me what lives in Freetown Forest?" I said, sounding a bit condescending. But the old-timer ignored my attitude because there were more important things happening. He looked at the man across the room for a moment, then turned his gaze back to me. "Ah, I hate this, but it's got to be done," he said, then sighed. It was the sigh of a man who had put down a heavy burden and knows he must pick it up again. "Evil, my boy," he said sharply. A short silence filled the room. I thought for a moment the old man might be joking, but then I saw the serious look in his eyes. Originally, this land belonged to the Wampanoag or Wampwag or whatever they call it. "The Wampanoag?" I asked. With one crooked finger, the old-timer pointed at me and shook it with approval. "That's the one," he said. "The Wampanoag tribe. In the early days of the New World, the Wampanoag tribe was driven away from these parts. There are rumors that this town was settled on an old Indian reservation. They say the valley is cursed or something. Just a lot of unexplained things happen from time to time. The place just feels bad." "I've heard the stories," I said, and my voice sounded a bit sarcastic. "Have you heard about the murder of Mary Lou Arruda in '78? He asked me. I shook my head. "I can't say I have." The name didn't sound familiar, and I think I'd remember a name like Mary Lou Arruda. In November 1978, the poor girl was found tied to a tree. Her killer beat her up really bad and left her for the wolves. The autopsy said when she lost consciousness, the weight of her body caused stress on her neck and she couldn't breathe. Did they find out who did it? Fortunately, yes. A man named James Cater, a donut maker in Raynham, Massachusetts. It wasn't the first, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. There are other things crawling around in those woods. I wouldn't go there alone or after dark. "Well, Mr. Wright, I'm all ears," I said. I realized I was using that condescending tone again. "I just can't help myself, can I?" About 10 years ago, 2 young backpackers were hiking along Haskell Path when a tree fell. The roots must have gone bad. That thing came tumbling down on top of them, killing them right away. When the firefighters lifted the thing off them, they looked like a steamroller had run over their poor bodies. The funeral had to be closed casket. Then just 6 years ago, Maggie Lawrence on Bolton Avenue lost her dog, Chipper, in those woods. 3 weeks later, he showed up at her doorstep, all bloody and sick. He came back not the friendly buddy she raised, but a creature whose only plans were to rip her throat out. The thing had a terrible smell. Maggie said he smelled like something that had been rotting in the hot sun for too long, like decaying flesh or something. Animal control came by and shot Chipper twice in the head. But a minute later, the thing got back up and charged the guy who shot him. The poor guy lost an eye. It took 2 men to pull the thing off him. They shot it 2 more times in the head and then burned the body. I don't know much, son, but I know when something doesn't go down after 2 shots in the head, it's not something of this world. Then, a few years back, a family, I think their name was Fitzgerald or something, and their 3 kids, he pronounced 3 like tree, came through here looking for stuff for a family hike. I remember the children so vividly. The oldest was Mark, the middle was Alex, and then there was the youngest, Brenna. He said with a sad look on his face, sweet little angel she was. I told the father about that place like I told you, but he wouldn't listen. What happened? I asked, now really interested in the old-timer's story. 2 hours went by. I was getting ready to close up shop when the father kicked in the door with his little girl in his arms. Her head hung like a dying flower when he carried her, her eyes were wide, and her body was swollen all over. The wrinkled look on his face got worse as he spoke. She'd fallen into a pit of rattlers. Rattlers? I thought, questioning. Oh, you mean rattlesnakes? I asked. That's what I mean, rattlers, he replied. The poor child was bitten from head to toe and died from the venom before the parents had a chance to get her to the car. I sighed. It was a tragedy nonetheless, and I know a thing or two about tragedies. Well, I said, I think I should be safe from rattlers. The cold this time of year has surely driven them underground until spring. The devil's pawns also occupy them woods, devil worshippers, Satanists, or, as I like to call them, wackadoodles. People see them every now and again at night from the light of their fires committing strange and unspeakable deeds. The wickedness of that place draws them to it. I'll be cautious about where I go, sir. You best also bring protection with you. People usually do, especially when they go walking around before sunset. You hear strange noises after sundown. What kind of strange noises? Sounds like crying or wailing coming from the treetops. Locals who live nearby think maybe the Pukwudgie is close by doing a bit of swift traveling. And what is the Pukwudgie, pray? I asked, a bit annoyed because I couldn't stop the sudden shiver of my nerves when I mentioned the word itself. I knew I was close to the man's fear and the cause of it. Just an old wives' tale they used to tell around campfires and lumber camps back when I was a boy. Nothing but what those lousy fellers believe when they've been hitting the whiskey bottle too hard. A sort of great animal that lives up yonder, he said, jerking his head northwards. Quicker than lightning in its tracks, smaller than most that live in the bush, but is said to be very dangerous, and ain't supposed to be too good to look at, is all. The old-timer sighed, sounding a bit flustered, and took out a pack of Rothman Royals from his pocket. He packed them, took one out, and put it between his lips. He continued to speak while he searched for his lighter. Don't let him catch you, son. If it does, it'll split you open from mouth to anus and wear your skin like a raincoat. I giggled at his remarks, thinking this was child's play the old-timer should have grown out of years ago. For a moment, nothing else was said. I just looked at the old man, wondering if he was a gifted liar or if he had a few marbles rolling around upstairs. He found his lighter, lit the end, and drew deeply on it. I've heard it all before, and I must say all of it is more far-fetched than I could have imagined. I continued snickering, but the old-timer just stood there, not amused by my lack of seriousness. Maybe it is, he said. I could tell by the look on his face that none of my previous experiences would match what lay in store for me. But I've lived here since it was just flat land and dirt roads, and in that time, I've learned to keep an open mind. I nodded at his remark, accepting him for what he may believe is living or not living in those woods. "You still intend on going, don't ya?" the old-timer asked. "I do," I replied. "I can see there's nothing I can say that'll change your mind." "Listen carefully, son," said the old-timer. "Stay on the trail, no matter what. Do not float off the path, or else you'll be lost in those woods and never be found." I couldn't take his warning seriously. These woods weren't as vast as they once were. The forest couldn't be more than 50 or 60 miles in size. It seemed very difficult to get yourself lost in there for all eternity. And stay away from Hockomock Swamp. The mist and the marsh can tinker with your mind. I had heard rumors about Hockomock Swamp. People around these parts referred to it as the Devil's Swamp. "I'll wait here at this counter till sundown. If you don't walk through that door," he said, pointing his crooked finger to the doorway I entered, "I'm calling the police chief and telling him we got ourselves another transient who went sticking his nose where it doesn't belong." "I hear you, old-timer," I replied. "I promise I'll be out of those woods and on the road again before dusk." But old Mr. Wright did not believe a word of it. He just stared at me with his stone-cold hazel eyes. As I walked out the door and back toward my car, the two men continued with their conversation. "You had no business letting him go," said the other man across the room. "There was nothing stopping him from going," Mr. Wright replied. "This is something he'll need to figure out on his own." He drew deep on his cigarette and held it for a moment or two, and as he exhaled, an opaque cloud of smoke wafted across the room. "Boys really brave, really stupid, or really ignorant, or all of the above," Wright said. "I'd go with option D," the other man replied. "Typical millennial generation, am I right?" and giggled at his response. All Right looked over at the other man stacking cans of pickled okra and smiled a bit, but he did not laugh. All Right just stood, leaned over on the counter, looking like he was coming down with a fever. In his eyes, you could see the fear looming inside of him. "That may be the last anyone will see of that boy," he thought to himself. "What kind of fool did he take me for?" I asked myself, what a load of poop that was. "The Pukwudgie?" I asked, just the way it rolled off my tongue sounded wacky. A few more minutes in that place, and I would have turned crazy like Casey Anthony. As I turned off onto an unpaved side road, a metal frame sign was posted up at the intersection. It read Coppicat Road. The ground was eroded and still laved by the runoff from the rainfall the night before. The placid water splashed my windshields, leaving my field of sight veiled with an accumulation of lumpy mush. I continued driving, passing the occasional pickup truck veered off to the side of the road and even a group of hikers marching along both sides of the road in staggered formation. It reminded me of an army ruck march. Make sure you're careful and make sure you wear your neon strap around your backpack. It's turkey and pheasant season. Those woods will be teeming with hunters, my granddad told me the night before. I wasn't entirely sure what my reasons were for coming this far out of my way just to walk these trails, but I knew it had something to do with Brian. I needed closure, and I knew I would not find that anywhere close to home, but what would I be proving by traveling out here? I found a spot that looked pretty good. I parked my car on the side of the road and packed my backpack. I double-checked to make sure I had everything: a roast beef sandwich, 2 Special K pastry bars, 2 tangerines, a banana, a bottle of water, a bottle of Powerade, a Nutri-Grain bar, a flashlight, with extra batteries, a spare pair of socks, my Vanguard buck knife strapped to my belt for easy access, a portable med kit with a cylindrical canister of Raleigh antiseptic salve I bought at the market. Lastly, there was my Smith & Wesson .38 snub-nose revolver, or as the older folks like to call it, a lemon squeezer. Even though I didn't believe Mr. Wright's ghost stories, I still didn't like venturing out on my own without a backup plan. What's that old saying? The pessimist looks down and hits his head, while the optimist looks up and loses his footing, and the realist looks forward and adjusts his path accordingly. I took the revolver and tucked it into my back waistband for quick access. I looked and saw the marker sign hammered to a tree trunk. It read Hathaway Trail. I didn't have a special reason for choosing this trail, I just felt I was far enough away from people now, and I could be by myself. I started walking down the trail's long path. I looked up and saw the crisp, copper leaves on the trees swaying back and forth in the autumn wind. My cheeks were flush red from the harsh cold, but it didn't bother me at all. At last, I thought, peace and quiet. A lot of time passed, and so far, nothing exciting happened. I was starting to think Mr. Wright was just making up crazy stories. The forest was quiet, except for the faint noise of cars on the nearby highway, which meant I wasn't completely cut off from the outside world. Clouds hung in the sky like big ships sailing slowly, leaving shadows behind them. Then, I came across an old car, a '58 Plymouth Fury. Despite its rusty look, it still had its original charm. The once bright red exterior now looked like the color of carnelian or maybe red velvet cake. It used to be a fancy luxury car, but now it was just a part of nature, covered in leaves and pine straw. As I walked, I heard something strange, a heavy snap, like a tree branch breaking under something heavy. I turned around and listened, but there was nothing more. It could have been another hiker or an animal, but it sounded too big for a small creature like a possum or a raccoon. I didn't dwell on that thought for too long. After walking a bit more, I found a flat rock and decided to take a break. The trees and plants blocked most of my view, but I could see the lower basin below. Long ago, black bears and white-tailed deer roamed here, but now they were scarce due to hunting and land ownership. These moments of peace in places like this were hard to come by nowadays. I opened my bag and took out a water bottle. By the time I finished drinking, I had almost emptied it. I decided to eat a tangerine, a Nutri-Grain bar, and a Special K bar. I planned to eat my sandwich next, but I wasn't quite hungry yet. I leaned against a rock, closed my eyes, and set an alarm on my phone for 15 minutes. When I woke up to the alarm, the birds were still singing, the crows were being noisy, and it felt like I had just closed my eyes for a moment. Although it was tempting to stay there and nap, I knew I had to keep moving. I got up, dusted myself off, put on my backpack, and continued walking. I had been walking in the woods for a long time, exploring for hours, trying to see if there was anything spooky about it. Finally, I found an open field covered in what looked like barberry bushes, but I wasn't sure. The bushes were a bright red, like a field in a painting I saw at a museum. Feeling a strange force pulling me, I left the path and entered the field. It was beautiful, but then I heard footsteps ahead. It didn't sound like small animals, it was too big, like a deer or maybe a coyote. But it seemed to be moving with bare feet on the forest floor, not like an animal. The sound was coming from the trees about 20 yards ahead. I couldn't see anything because of the branches and shadows. I stood still, waiting and watching. I was sure something was there, watching me carefully. I slowly reached for my .38 pistol, held it in my hand, and fired a shot into the air. The loud bang echoed like a rocket launch. I heard the sound again, but now whatever it was moving away from me, deeper into the forest. I stood there, listening to its footsteps fading away. I thought to myself, it's gone now. But a worried voice in my head wondered, what if it comes back? If it does, I told myself, I won't shoot again unless I have to. The sun was setting over the Appalachian Mountains as I climbed up a steep hill. The trails were covered in litter, styrofoam coffee cups from Starbucks, bags of chips, and candy wrappers. Some rocks along the hillside had graffiti on them, with messages that ranged from clever to cliché. One message on a big rock caught my attention. I couldn't help but laugh. The message seemed a bit impractical to me, as if someone was trying too hard to sound deep. Even though the quote was unclear, I had my own thoughts about what the writer was trying to say. It felt like kids these days believed they could do anything, that they were limitless and perfect. But I knew better than that. Nothing lasts forever, and nothing is perfect in this world. I should know that more than most people, but let's not get into that right now. I walked along, enjoying the sounds of the birds in the treetops and the crickets humming in the autumn air. The frogs were croaking loudly, like ladies with swollen throats shouting into the evening sky, and occasionally, a woodpecker's rattling pitch echoed through the woods. All of a sudden, a chill ran down my spine. I heard a loud wailing sound from up ahead, and it made me tear up. You can call me a scaredy cat, but I knew something was coming down the hill. It wasn't an animal or a person, but a distant sound that was getting closer fast. It moved so quickly that I expected to see where it was coming from at any moment. There was no scary shape or huge beast, just a wild laughter echoing down the hillside. The voice in the wind was calling my name, and it felt so close now. It seemed like the laughter had no form, no body to belong to, just a loud and sharp voice that might cast a spooky shadow along the seam of my pants. I listened as the sound moved all around me. The wind picked up speed, swirling heaps of leaves out of the forest and past me. The revolver tucked into my back belt loop felt useless. The voice went from high-pitched laughter to deep chuckling before fading away completely. In that moment, I felt like I had just heard a ghost. The cold laughter was gone, and the regular whistling of the wind returned. I struggled as a lump of spit got stuck in my throat. My chest rose and fell as I managed to spit out a gross, yellow lump onto the rocky surface. I stood there, staring into the dark woods, wondering what I had just experienced. Then I decided not to let Mr. Wright's spooky stories get the best of me. "A loon," I mumbled, "just a loon." A voice inside my head asked, "A loon, at this time of year?" "Yeah," I whispered, "just a flock of them on their way south to the Carolinas or Georgia maybe." The sky was painted with mahogany, orange, and purple as the sun dipped below the horizon. The clouds promised a calm and peaceful night. It's time I start heading back. I checked my wristwatch, but it showed the wrong time, 3:25 p.m. Damn thing's broken again, I told myself. Without faltering, I reached for my phone, only to find it out of juice. One problem after the other. No matter, I'll just double back the way I came and eventually hit the main road, easy peasy lemon squeezy. However, as I walked, I realized I was nowhere closer to my car. Everything looked the same, and the night sky loomed in the distance. My heart ached as I hadn't seen any mile markers or signs of people for at least an hour. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to find a man in a black hood standing behind me. The OL timer mentioned the devil's pawns in these woods. If they were around, I should have seen them by now, right? A million questions raced through my mind, and I couldn't tell which way was up or down. Stopping on the trail, I unstrapped my sack and started digging through it. A neon red word lit up in my mind, Eureka! I found the flashlight I brought with me. I turned it on, and its bright light exceeded my expectations. I continued down the slope, and the forest fell silent. It seemed odd, but it didn't shake my confidence. I still wasn't convinced there was anything supernatural going on in Freetown Forest. I was worried, but I remembered looking at a map before I came out here, and on that map, there was a brook nearby, Rattlesnake Brook. In survival training in the Army, they taught us that if you ever find yourself lost in the woods without a compass, map, protractor, or pencil, you should search for running water. Running water always leads to the ocean, where there is civilization and people. I felt my confidence restored. It shouldn't be too hard to find, just be patient and listen for running water, I thought to myself. As the light faded, my field of vision grew dim. Then, I heard something unusual, something I didn't expect to hear this far out in the woods. It sounded like laughter, a child's laughter. I turned and did a 180 spin. Where was it coming from? I asked myself. Is someone there? I called out shyly, but no one replied. Just up ahead, something entered my peripheral vision. A blurry mix of gray and white ran from one side of the path to the other. It moved on all fours like a chimp, but what I remembered definitively were 3 bony fingers on each hand passing through the bush. I'd never seen my own 2 feet work like they did that day. I began sprinting in the opposite direction, howling with uncontrollable fright. I went off the trail, fumbling through tree branches and thorn bushes. I did my best to keep my speed, moving faster than an old maid trying to catch the bridal bouquet. As the brush thickened, I soon couldn't tell which direction I was running. My pant leg got caught for a moment, but I managed to free myself and kept on moving. I saw an opening just up ahead where the darkened sky peered down on top of me. I hurried through those bushes and leaped out into the open, but when I realized I was not standing in a field, my heart sank. It felt like I'd stepped in some runoff from a sewage pipe. First, the stench hit me, a mix of something rotten and something dead. I had stepped into a bog, the mist draped itself around my knees, and the ground was loose and moist. My feet had sunk maybe 10 inches into the loose, grime-ridden earth. I struggled to lift my ankles up from the mud, a loud suction noise followed by an outward rupture of mire and grunge as I pulled my feet free. I lost my balance for a moment, tumbling backward into the tree line. I felt like a bottle of suds shook too hard. I was frightened and lost. God damn it! I yelled, "Oh Jesus, find me in the Alps. What do you want from me?" It wasn't until afterwards I discovered I had stepped into Hockomock Swamp. Something overcame me. I felt fatigued, as if I'd just run the Boston Marathon. My eyesight doubled, and I shook my head trying not to pass out. A regiment of black moths clouded my vision, and I could feel myself beginning to tip backward. My stomach felt queasy. It was a fight between me and my stomach, and I was losing badly. Remember what the old-timer said, the mist and the marsh tinker with your mind. I had to get out of that place quickly. Staying longer, I would have fainted and fallen face first into the marsh, becoming a late-night snack for whatever came passing by. I turned back and tried to find my bearings but froze when I saw it. What in the world is that? I asked myself. My conscience replied, an animal. The thing was stuck in the weeds and the forest's undergrowth. I moved cautiously towards it. It's dead. It was a deer once, but now it was just a memory. It was split open like a piñata, its face was half gone, a whole section was torn out from its chest, its ribs were picked clean, its entrails lay on the ground partly eaten, the blood was hardened and black like a woodchuck's. Its eyes. What happened to its eyes? I thought. In the place where its eyes should have been were 2 vacant, black holes. It took its eyes. This wasn't hunger, this wasn't instinct, this was rage, a raspy voice in my head replied. Abomination was the first word that came to mind. Only something so horrible could do something so evil. Then I began contemplating what might have actually been the wrongdoer in this act. A coyote? I considered it for a minute, but I knew right away I was wrong. No, not a coyote. Coyotes don't do this. A lynx if large enough, perhaps? Then I heard an indistinct voice join in the conversation. It was a voice I had no association with before in my life. The voice sounded prim and proper with an icy undertone that was overflowing with pique. You know what did this, the cold voice replied, it's been watching you. There's no such thing as a pukwudgie, I said and would continue to repeat to myself over and over and over and over again. Must we play games, my inquisitive friend? We both know you are just lying to yourself, the voice said tauntingly. It takes their eyes so no one has to bear witness to its revolting appearance. Why don't you just piss off already? I said, now trying to shoo away the voice. Just like that, it left, did not put up much of a fight. Perhaps my frustration was enough to drive it off, but it would be back, that much I was certain. It would let me win this round, but it would be back. Beside the animal's remains in the marsh, I saw deep impressions like something on all fours had bolted off. They went northward, the opposite way from which I'd come. Whatever it was, it's moved on elsewhere. Lord knows whatever mauled this deer may come back. Let the meats ripen some more before it comes back and finishes the leftovers. The sun was almost gone now, and I was still no closer to finding my way out of this forsaken place. As I moved away from the marsh, my vision began to restore itself. The knots in my stomach vanished, but I did not feel well again, for I knew something was with me back there in the bog. I could not shake the feeling that I was under surveillance, that something was watching me carefully from the trees. I managed to find my way back onto one of the trails, but with very little daylight left, I couldn't tell if I was going the right way, back towards the road, or the wrong way, further into the forest. My light flickered a time or two, the batteries were beginning to die, but I was in no real danger of losing the light just yet. I was wary enough to purchase an extra set of batteries back at the Main Street Market before coming into these woods. It may have been the best decision I had made so far in my day, or possibly the remainder of my life, I thought to myself. I stopped along the trail, moved away from my mind, and took a moment to listen to the sound of the woods. I was startled when I realized there was no sound. The birds in the tree branches were gone, as well as the delicate movement of squirrels and chipmunks in the bushes. To the untrained eye, or ear, that seemed like nothing, but to a man like me, nature does not go quiet unless there was something foreboding nearby. I opened the cylinder to my .38 and checked to make sure I got a good count on the number of rounds I had left. 4 unused rounds were still loaded in the cylinder, along with 5 more spares tucked away in my front, right pocket. I closed the cylinder and held the gun at the low and ready. I kept my finger outside the trigger guard. I did not want to risk startling myself and inadvertently waste a round. I had only 9 casings left, so I had to make them count. I lifted the flashlight and pointed it ahead. Then, on the trail behind me, something moved. I whirled around with the flashlight pointed down the trail and the revolver this time up and at the ready, with my finger wrapped over the trigger. I was caught off guard by a man standing in the middle of the path about 10 yards back. His arms were folded. He wore a long, black cassock and a hood like those satanic cultists O.L. Wright talked about. Is this one of them? I asked myself. Is this one of the cultists Mr. Wright spoke of? Who are you? I yelled. The man didn't answer. He just stood there staring at me through the black hood. Show yourself, I demanded. Let me see your face. I was now giving orders to my hidden visitor. The man didn't step forward, nor did he speak. He just withdrew his pale, white hands from the sleeves of his cassock and pulled back the cover from his face. When I finally saw what was under the hood, the hand holding the revolver fell to my side. What I saw was something I couldn't understand. It was the face of my deceased brother, Brian. It can't be, I whispered. The man in the cassock said nothing. He just kept staring at me. But I saw you die, I said to the man. The woods were silent. The light in the sky now turned to a perpetual gray. The wind blew up piles of leaves and dancing dervishes. Who the hell are you? My voice was no longer demanding but was enraged. You can't be him. So tell me, who the hell are you? Finally, the man in the cassock spoke, not with the same voice as my late brother but with the same cold voice that had spoken to me earlier in the back of my mind. I am the keeper of this place. The voice was just as prim and proper as before, but not as hateful. I've lived in these woods for a very long time. Why do you look like my brother? I asked. I had to take the shape of someone you knew. I can appear as others if you'd like, said the man in the cassock. Don't, I replied. While it was tough to see his face again, it did me some good seeing him in good health without the sickish, yellow tinge he had in his final days. What do you want with me? Are you the reason I am lost? I asked. I have not, nor have I been responsible for any ill-will acts, the man replied. As you've seen, I am not the only one who dwells within these woods. I am the warden here, the custodian, the curator, the guardian, or just simply the keeper of the woods? The man in the cassock said in a resentful tone. There are other spiteful specters that live in these woods. You should have listened to the old timer. This place is cursed. I felt as if I were on the verge of crying, but my pride was every bit as important to me as the life I held dearly to right then. Whether this man was real or not, crying in front of others was truly degrading in my opinion. I couldn't remember the last time I cried in front of others, not since I was young, was my supposition. Not at the wake or the funeral or any other event following, or even that night when the pain hurt the most. That is what brought you here. Whether you believe in them or not, you came here because of the reputation this forest holds. You may say that it is all rubbish, but before you answer that, remember who you are speaking to. While I wanted to deny his claims, I couldn't lie to the man in the cassock. If he truly was what he said he was, then lying to him would be as useful as a screen door on a submarine. I wanted to see if the myths were real or not. I said in a husky, whining whisper, I just wanted proof that there was something after this life, but But you did not anticipate your speculations would be true, the man interjected. I breathed deeply, then asked the man, what is it? The thing in the woods, the thing that's been stalking me? The man in the cassock stared at me for a moment or two, then he replied, it was once human. I felt my heart skip a beat when he spoke. The thought of whatever it was out there and the idea that it was once a human frightened me dearly. Now it is just a thing in the woods. Will it kill me? I asked, now feeling like I was on the brink of falling onto the cold, dirt path and beginning to cry. Perhaps, the man said questionably, as if he was not sure what the answer was himself. Is there any hope for me? Perhaps. Damn it, is that all you can say to me? The man did not reply this time. He just continued staring at me intently. Everything went quiet again for a minute, then he began to speak. Why have you not visited him? What? Your brother's grave. You have not visited him since his funeral. Is this why you're here? You're here to chastise me? No, the man replied. I simply want your answer, and then I will decide. Decide on what? I asked. The man made no reply. I looked at him until my face turned red, then I decided not to waste any more time. I don't know, I said as if I was on the verge of tears. I've asked myself that same question so many times, and so many times I come back with nothing. I feel as if I am a bad person. How much can a person love someone when there are no tears worth shedding? Part of me resents myself because of it. I wished I had sobbed like a little boy at his funeral. I wished I could release all of this hate I should feel, but instead I feel like a hollow shell. Just an empty space on the inside. We stood for a moment without saying anything. Now, I replied. Are you satisfied? I asked the man in the cassock. Yes, the man replied. Now tell me, what is your answer? The man went for the longest time without saying anything. I thought I would have to yell at the top of my lungs, but finally, he said to me. No, he replied. No? I asked. My answer is no. I cannot help you. But you said dash. I said I would hear your story. That does not mean I will be the one to help you. Whether you survive or not is not up to me, son. That is up to you, he said, pointing one pale finger toward me. I can't guarantee the beast will keep away or that the vengeful spirits of this place will stay at bay, but in the end, the decision falls on you. The more I listened, the more I felt I was speaking to my brother again and not some manifestation of a man in a black cassock. What happens is between you and him. Who? I asked. Him. He pointed towards the sky. I looked up, expecting to find the answer above me, but all I could see was the dark, blue atmosphere. Then I realized what he'd meant. You're talking about the big man upstairs? To me, he has no name, he is simply just him. I laughed at his response. The last time I spoke to him for a favor, my brother died, so I do my best to stay out of his way. I understand your animosity. Humans are always so vindictive when a tragedy befalls them. The soul's journey is one of grace and pure misery. The cosmos guides us and nurtures us, much like a loving parent. For a man who resembles a cultist, he seems so gentle. But that parent knows the value of tough love. Often it leads us into a place that brings us suffering, and where that suffering can deepen our wisdom. And it is perfectly willing to allow us to make irrational choices which can lead to unbearable outcomes. Do you understand what I mean, son? I did not respond to his question, though. The keeper of the woods, I thought to myself. I had so many questions I wanted to ask, but the next thing I remember, I was laying against a tree trunk off to the side of the trail. It was just a dream, I told myself. An hour, maybe an hour and a half, had gone by no doubt. The sky was pitch black, and my flashlight flickered more frequently than before. Before I proceeded with anything else, I quickly took up the spare set of Duracell AA batteries and replaced the ones in my flashlight. I felt comforted by the idea that the man in the black cassock was never real. However, I was not fully convinced that it was a dream. For no matter how hard I tried, I could not remember falling asleep. I could not remember resting. Hardly seemed like the right time for it. I could not remember any break in my consciousness, and it didn't feel like a dream. That was what worried me most. All of a sudden, the quiet woods exploded with a strange noise. It hit my ears out of nowhere, a voice that seemed almost human but gruff and sad. The sound was up in the trees, not on the ground. It reminded me of when my family and I went to the zoo and heard the lynxes. This voice had 3 notes, and then it vanished abruptly, like when you lift a needle off a record player. I spun around, gun drawn, pointing it in every direction. The sounds were awful, making me want to curl up and wait for someone to rescue me, but there was no one around. Just me and the thing in the woods. I wanted to cry for help, but no sound came out. The woods went eerily silent again, but then a new noise, different from before, rushed in from the side. A scrabbling sound and the rustle of dry brush. Something was coming. Run, my mind screamed. Run as fast as you can. So, I did. I ran with all my might up the steep path. The sound surrounded me, swarming over me. My lungs burned, and my muscles ached like an old machine. Finally, I couldn't run anymore. The weight of my bag and the tough terrain wore me out faster than I thought. The awful sound still rang in my ears, like sad wind chimes. Wind chimes sound nice, but this beast's noise was horrible. Then, a new sound joined the screeching, a loud and evil laugh. It was in the trees, laughing wildly, enjoying the fear before feasting on my flesh like a dog chewing on a piece of steak. The creature in the woods was catching up fast. I tried to catch my breath while moving forward, but I didn't notice a tree root sticking out of the ground. I took a step, and before I knew it, I was falling forward, hands flailing as I tumbled onto the gravel path. The pain was awful. My ankle felt like it was on fire and ice, as if a bunch of wasps were stinging me all at once. The creature climbed through the trees, hobbling forward with a bad limp. My flashlight and pistol were out of reach in the dark. I felt vulnerable and unarmed. I grabbed a stone and threw it into the brush, hoping to scare the creature away, but I missed. Searching for more stones, I threw them one after another into the darkness. But I ran out of stones. As they say, I was out of ammo. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness. It stepped into the uncertain light, not 6 feet away, then stopped and stared down at me. It moved forward with jerky motions like a puppet on strings. The creature was no more than 3, maybe 3.5 feet tall, with unusually large hands and feet. Its skin was ghostly pale, with blackened teeth like old tombstones. Mostly skin and bones, but with strong muscles in the right places. I tried to crawl away, but it stepped onto the trail. Its back right leg was gnarly and misshapen, a clear sign of a gunshot wound, probably from a hunter's round that missed its heart. "Oh no!" I whispered. I couldn't scream. My attempt to shout for help yielded nothing. The creature rushed toward me. With my left foot, I kicked it in the face, and blood sprayed from its mouth. But now it was even more agitated. I tried kicking again, but it leaped on top of me. Its icy fingers touched my bare belly, and I struggled to free myself, but it was stronger than it looked. Its long, uneven fingernails scratched my skin, and I felt a sharp pain, followed by the strange smell of iron and pennies. Is this how it ends for me? I wondered. Its warm breath was on my face and neck, making my hairs stand on end. With my one free hand, I reached for my knife, ripped it from its sheath, and stabbed it into the creature's left thigh. Blood flew everywhere, a dark, somber gray like an overcast sky and thick as molasses in December. My gun was too far, so I forced myself to flip over onto my stomach. The creature mounted my back, tearing away my bag's fabric and Velcro. Its violent thrashing dragged me across the ground, and my bag straps were ripped off my shoulders. But its focus wasn't on me. It searched through my bag, looking for something specific. Finally, it pulled out a small, translucent, plastic bag, the sandwich I had packed. "The meat," a voice in my head cried. This was my chance. The creature took the bag, tearing the meat and discarding the rest. I scrambled for my gun, desperately searching. I could hear its frenzied feeding and the memory of horror movies in my head. The sound of my heartbeat was like the wings of a caged bird, and I prayed to feel the cold, metallic cylinder of the weapon. But suddenly, the creature was on me again. I couldn't fight back well with my hurt ankle. The creature pulled me closer with a strong hand, and I feared it would hurt me even more. I cried out, screaming until my voice got hoarse, my arms reaching for anything to grab. Then, I felt the cold, steel barrel of the revolver. With one last burst of energy, I pushed the creature away and reached for my weapon. It lunged at me again, standing on two legs like a person, arms spread like a scarecrow, and that terrible cackle filled my ears. Suddenly, there was a thunderous boom, a bright flash, and a loud crack, like lightning. In the glow, I saw the creature thrown back into the trees. It screamed in agony, a sound almost human. I wanted to block it out, cover my ears, but I couldn't escape that haunting noise. I waited, my vision filled with blue, red, and yellow spots. The sound of its footsteps faded as it moved farther away until crickets' chirps replaced it. I didn't kill it, I just made it go away, just like God drove away Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. The cut on my belly wasn't as deep as I thought, but the sight of blood made me queasy. I grabbed the med kit from my bag, applied Raleigh salve, covered the wound with gauze, and wrapped it with a bandage. I didn't want to stay any longer than necessary. I picked up my flashlight and my .38 and moved on. The creature was gone, but I had angered it. Time passed as it always did. The throbbing pain in my ankle got worse the more I moved. The pain was so strong that it almost erased all thought. A half hour later, I reached the top of a steep slope and felt like a heavy stone had been lifted from my heart. 20 or 30 yards ahead, I saw a road gate and, beyond that, an asphalt surface. Civilization. I chanted in my head. I moved as fast as I could, even though my body hurt a lot. The pain throbbed in my joints, and my muscles were working really hard. As I got closer to the gate, my body felt stiff again. I stopped just a few feet from the edge of the forest. When I looked back, the man in the black cassock was standing just 10 feet away from me in the middle of the trail. This time, I was sure I wasn't sleeping. I knew for sure. His hood was pulled back, his forehead wrinkled, and he had a small smile on his lips. The smile was so sweet, with just the right touch of shyness, just like how Brian used to smile. On this face, it was a sign of happiness. My throat felt dry, and my chest felt light. I turned away from the man in the cassock, and tears welled up in my eyes. I tried to sniff quietly when I realized that an important part of my life had come and gone. I didn't cry then, but I knew I would cry later. "I loved you, Brian," I said out loud. Then I started walking towards the road. I walked until the man in the cassock disappeared into the darkness of the forest. What was the protagonist's survival training advice that he remembered from the army when he found himself lost in the woods? Describe the creature encountered in the woods. What were its characteristics, and how did it behave? If you enjoyed this thrilling story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more exciting tales. Your support means a lot to us.